So this is week 103 of our weekly discussions, and we're talking about honoring the gift of time. What is EA? EA is an idea. Maximize the good you can do through your career, projects, and donations. It's also a community of many individuals and organizations who care about this idea and who gather around it. And as we start this discussion about time, I want to start out with a very familiar passage in Genesis 1. It's recorded God said, let there be light, and let the light shine out of the darkness. And among other things, we see this as Christians as being God authoring the universe, but also being the author of time. And we see an incredible timeline in the universe. Scientists tell us that the universe is many, many billions of years old, and that there are many interesting cosmic things happening within nanoseconds at the very beginning, over many hundreds of thousands, millions, and even billions of years as the universe expanded into the stars and galaxies that we know now, into the modern universe, and then eventually up to today's day. And if you look at the history of the Earth, this was also something that happened over a very long time. We're talking billions of years, and the duration of time during which humans have been alive on Earth has been very small. I think right here, the first hominins have been around for about 2 million years. This little red sliver covers the history of the Earth. If the whole circle is the history of the Earth, this little red sliver is the amount that humans have been on Earth for. So I love the story of this person here. I don't know if anybody can guess who this person is. It's a character from the Bible. It is Queen Esther. And Queen Esther, we read about in the Old Testament in the book of Esther. And she was working to save the Jews who were being oppressed in the kingdom of Persia. And at one point, after she stumbles on an opportunity to save the Jews, her cousin Mordecai says something like this: "Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this?" And I think this is a wonderful, wonderful line, because it points out to this reality that God has made each and every one of us for our specific time, and that there are things within our given time and context that we can do to help others and to honor Him. And I just want to turn this point onto you, that you individually, you are in a unique time and place and context. All of us are in different places around the world, the 8 or 9 of us on this call, but also those watching later. And we can ask ourselves, therefore, how do we best honor this time in this opportunity God has given us? So a quick roadmap of what I'm going to share next. I just want to look at another timeline of our lives, look at some other shocking time facts, and then raise some questions and some Christian perspectives of how we might think about time and how we might practically use our time better, how we might manage it better. I don't have the solutions here. I mostly just want to point out some interesting facts and get our heads spinning. And we can maybe share some solutions in the discussion afterwards. So if you are alive today, there's a reasonable chance that you'll be able to live until you're about 80 or maybe even 100. And if you live to be 100 years old, that adds up to 5,200 weeks of life, each represented by a little red dot here in this image. That is a lot of time, and we can break it up into different sections. We can think about like the early years of our life, the first 12 years are our childhood, as making up these first arrays of light blue circles. We can think of the next chapter, our teens and our educational years, as up to this point, so still only about a fifth of our lives. And then the bulk of our lives, this is when we think we really are free in a sense. We really have a lot of control of what we do, and this is also for many of us the time of our lives when we're working. We're spending much of this time, much of each day during this period at our vocation, whatever God has called us to. Maybe that's a job, maybe that's other important paths in life. But that is a huge chunk of our life between age 20 and 65. And then at the end of that, you have what people call retirement, or the golden years, or whatever you want to call it. And this might be much smaller or much larger for some people, depending on circumstances and how fortunate you might happen to be. But here's some shocking facts about this timeline. If you live to be 100, you'll be alive for over 800,000 hours. That's an incredible amount. In fact, I heard this fact mentioned in church today. It was kind of a funny coincidence. The pastor was saying that if you go to church 1 hour a week for your entire life, then the time you spend in church, no, I think it was even 2 hours a week. It was either 1 or 2 hours a week. Then the time you spend in church over your entire lifetime is less than 1%. And the challenge of my pastor was something like, Christianity is not something just for church, right? Just for being in church on Sunday morning. Christianity is about honoring time. It's so much more than the time you have on Sunday mornings. So just an interesting and shocking fact there. If you take that 800,000 hours, you can break it down into several different things, including your career. Many of us know of 80,000 hours. This is a charity, but also a common fact that many of us will have 80,000 hours in our career. That's 40 hours a week for 50 years, over 40 years of our life. That's also a very big number. Here's another interesting time fact. If you're moved out from your parents and you now see your parents for only 2 weeks a year, you've already spent over 90% of the time you will ever spend with them your whole life. Here is an interesting graphic from this, like the graphics before. By the way, I took all of these graphics from a really good Kurzgesagt video called something like the timeline of your life or the time left you have in your life. Really interesting and thought-provoking. But here's a graphic showing the number of weeks you spent with your parents as a child. And then if let's say you're 25 and you have, you're no longer living with them, you only see them 2 weeks a year, these would be the number of weeks you have left with your parents. So you've already spent over 90% of that time. Really interesting fact. Another really interesting time fact is that, and maybe more of a concept, is that little things really add up. If you're 25 and you spend 2 hours a day on social media, which is something like what a lot of marketing firms estimate people actually spend on social media, is like 2 hours a day. That adds up to a lot of time. Every year that adds up to something like 700 hours. And again, if you're going to live a really long time, if you're going to live to be 100, which I think some of us on this call will, then that's about 50,000 hours before you die. Just an insane amount of time. It's a huge resource that maybe in the moment it doesn't feel like it, but it definitely adds up. Here's a cool graphic I found from Visual Capitalist. These are who Americans spend their time with. And the share of who we spend our time with, it changes as we get older. So when we're age 20, we spend a lot of time alone and with family. But as we get older, we spend more and more time with our coworkers, less and less time with family. And of course, this trend some of these trends continue, some of these trends dial off. I'm happy to share these slides later because I found this very interesting. How the amount of time we spend doing different things changes as we get older. I want to close by just asking some questions. How can we better honor God's gift of time? How can we honor key relationships, for instance, with God, with our family? We mentioned that our time with our family shrinks as we get older. How do we still honor these relationships in ways that God wants us to? How do we spend the right amount of time with friends and also serving our neighbors, both our immediate neighbors, but also our global neighbors? One interesting thing we might think about this is like, how do we allocate our time between volunteering for our local community, but also thinking about and giving towards neighbors who live on the other side of the planet, or maybe neighbors who lived before us. That's maybe a bit abstract, just as neighbors who come after us is a bit abstract, but maybe there's a way that we can use our time to honor these neighbors. Another thing we can discuss is how we can be more effective at using our time to help the global poor. And then also wrestle with some biblical themes here. We read in Ephesians 5:16 that we should make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Paul is talking about how the clock is ticking in a sense, and we have to run the good race. And we as Christians should really not take time for granted, but should make the most of every opportunity. But we still see other passages in Scripture that criticize maybe overly efficient-minded use of time, or that's the wrong way to put it. The exact way that it's put in 1 Thessalonians 4 is people who act really busy, but they're only busy bodies. So how is it that we can try to be effective with our time, but not just come off as busy people who don't have time for anyone, right? And then feel free to share in your discussion groups any cool life hacks that you have, or time hacks, time management tools. There's a couple that I've used that I found helpful. These could be things like, the Pomodoro technique for productivity, or other kinds of apps, or just considerations or heuristics that you use.